I suppose I am a mixed media visual artist. Always have loved collage. I like to pick things up off the floor or out of bins. So I have kind of quite a large and varied collection of just stuff that people throw away, and a lot of books that I found in charity shops, or people give me stuff all the time. I like playing cards and cigarette cards, tea cards, people's lists. I haven't made much work with people's lists yet, but anything with people's handwriting on I find really interesting. You know, what have they written in? Why have they written that list? Is it because they're forgetful? Have they given it to someone else that might forget? I write lists for my husband all the time, but he never takes them anywhere. We have a wish list for the house, and we made a post-lockdown like bucket list of things we want to do this year, and it's June and we haven't done any of them. Like my really early memories are just of like this collection of wax crayons that I had. I think my dad won them for me in a competition. I don't think I won them myself, but it was like this massive carry case of wax crayons that were all like in 3 tiers and arranged beautifully. Just was quite happy in my own little world. I'm actually autistic, so I think it's one of the things that I learnt to do so that people would leave me alone. So if you're drawing or if you're reading, or you know, if you look busy, people don't disturb you. And I must have learnt that very early on. One of the commissioned artists that I worked with on the project was a community theatre company called The Common Lot here in Norwich, and they created a series of rebel women blue plaques for the city. So these are women that we don't really know very much about, and yeah, I approached them and said, can I have one for Marianne North? And they said, yes, you can make it yourself, which will be installed somewhere in Hastings this summer. Marianne North was born in Hastings in 1830, I believe, and the North family spent part of their time in Hastings and part of their time in Norfolk, which is where we are now. And Marianne was also schooled in Norwich, like very, very briefly. So between her and myself, there are kind of quite a lot of strange parallels. So that's kind of why I was initially interested, is because I thought I was kind of quite uniquely positioned to explore both of those areas, because I'd grown up kind of exploring the coastline, probably like she did, and then being now in Norwich, I was like, oh, how very weird. For me, geography was not a strong subject at school, but I used to love just being outside in the landscape. I would take myself off from my mum's house, which is on the West Hill, and I would walk all the way to Fairlight probably in a day, and that's just what I did growing up. She had no idea where I was. And I imagine Marianne North probably did the same thing, although maybe she was chaperoned because she was a Victorian woman. But Marianne North was an explorer, and she never married, which is obviously quite unusual for that time. I think she might have called marriage, it a ghastly experiment. So it's something that she was never really interested in. And she was financially independent after her father died. And so she was kind of able to do lots of things that she probably wouldn't have been allowed to do had she married and had children and stuff. So, and she explored the world all solo, and she painted plants wherever she found them. So she, unlike lots of botanical artists of the time, the fashion then was to paint a flower on a white background. She would paint these things that she found in situ. So she would paint the kind of local environment that they're in, which is really important for helping people back in Britain understand why the plants have evolved that way. You know, she was working at the same time as Charles Darwin as well. So that kind of environmental context was really useful sort of scientifically, which kind of hadn't been done before, and it was really unfashionable. So her paintings are very, very distinctive. But in her journals and her autobiography, she writes about the effects of logging and mining and kind of mankind's colonialisation of particularly America, kind of everybody spreading west and going up north to Canada. The next part of the project going forward will be looking at environmental changes, and obviously now that we're living through quite a lot of environmental crisis as well, the project seems quite time critical because, you know, there was this awareness of what we were doing to the planet 100, 200 years ago. This is a collection of some of the pieces that I've been spray painting over. So all of these tiny pieces of paper get they get a number of uses out of them before they become too brittle, or I think a lot of cat hair ends up in the wet paint. There's a collection of things to do with water that are not quite water. So there's a fountain, a bath, fish, fishing rod, a collection of plant life. I've got a collection of birds. I've got some animals, some horses, dogs. I worked for a time in a charity shop or volunteered, and somebody knew that I was from Hastings because I never shut up about it. And they gave me this set of cards that must have come in a donation. So they're just kind of souvenir photographs of the place that I love most. They get scanned and they get used digitally, but I'm never going to cut them up because they're too special. Cave. Weird piece of textile. Look at that. I think, again, someone gave this to me. It's not me, I'm not the problem. Other people are the problem, giving me stuff that I have to store. I dream a lot, I think, and that probably plays into my work as well. The fact that most things in my head don't make any sense to other people. So that probably comes out with paper as well. But yeah, I quite like to put things together that look as though they should have always been put together, so that the person looking might be fooled into thinking I've not done anything, when actually I've done something quite mind-blowing to me. Or sometimes I like putting things together that don't match at all, and sometimes that's mixing and matching time periods, so I'm not really particularly drawn to ephemera from post-70s, really. You know, anything pre that era is really interesting, and the print quality is good. I quite often will have a lot of Victorian women in my work, and then I also really like collecting stamps. So stamps are pretty cool, but I know I said I didn't like them, but quite modern stamps can sometimes be like some of the best. So sometimes those things go together. But I have won a commission from Coastal Currents to paint a BT box. So that is like the pieces that I've done for Norwich Market. They're originally collage, and then they are cut into stencils, large format stencils. So I'll be doing one of those in Hastings. I have two of those permanently in Norwich Market. And yeah, I've been using a lot of spray paint with my collage as well. So forming a collage, usually working outdoors, over painting with spray paint, usually in like neon pink, because I love fluorescent colours. And then you peel off the collage, and what you're left with is kind of like the reverse image. So a bit like cyanotype printing. I don't know if it's like relief printing or it's the opposite of relief printing. I can't quite work out what the process should be called. But the feather went on top of a horse because the piece was about a man called Pablo Fanque, who was Britain's first non-white circus proprietor in the UK, and he was born in Norwich. Pablo was an equestrian horse trainer, so I go a lot of horses. It was meant to be a saddle, but it was when we installed them, it was October, and it was really wet and really windy, so the stencil was really like it was paper, and obviously paper and wind, not really good mix, so the stencil kept lifting away from the wall. Someone was not impressed with my stenciling skills, so they've drawn a tail, which is fine. This one was created with a community theatre group at Theatre Royal, which was made up of former refugees, gender questioning young people, and students from the UEA. So the piece of theatre that this community group created was called Palm to Palm, and it was based on Romeo and Juliet, and it was kind of looking at Norwich as a welcoming space for refugees and just kind of like a cocooning city, really. So we've got the ship's wheel and the kind of stormy boat and the lighthouse and the spray. I think it was just after Brexit as well. So the yellow stars were a little bit of a nod to the EU referendum, which of course Norwich voted to remain. No, I think I've probably been traumatised by school trips to art galleries and museums, because I would normally be the child that would get lost and the bus might leave without you. So I don't really find them, I don't know if it's an accessibility thing, would rather go to TK Maxx and look at all the fabrics and textile patterns. And I have a kimono hanging up, and I think the illustration on the kimono, which is I think it's like a 1980s replica of a kimono. I think the illustration on that is much more interesting than maybe something I might find in a gallery. Because the person who illustrated that design for the kimono has expressed something themselves, and then the next person that comes along and wears that kimono is also then expressing themselves through just wearing it. I created a Facebook group for neurodiverse women and trans and non-binary people, for people in this area, because there isn't really any support for autistic people post-diagnosis. So I invited lots of these people to give me an info dump about themselves, which is where you kind of tell someone a lot about yourself very quickly. I'm going to info dump about my cat Nacho. He was a rescue. He was an RSPCA rescue, and we went to the cattery and he chose us. I knelt down in the kennel and he came and sat like on my knees and was just like, "Oh, I love you, hello." And we brought him home, and now he lives with us, and he's fantastic. He likes to collect sticks, so sometimes I wonder where he gets that from. He collects things. So he will bring home sticks or cable ties or lollipop sticks, anything stick-like. If he can't get it through the cat flap, he'll leave it by the back door. During my MA, I did a project about how we as sighted people communicate with blind and visually impaired people. The project kind of came from my own awkwardness around, do you offer help? You know, how do you interact with someone if you're not sure how much they can see? So that was my final year project, and I did quite a lot of collage, but I also used cyanotype printmaking as well. So that was to do with how we see with light and making work with light, which was really fun. And then after I graduated, a couple of years later, they invited me back to do an artist residency at Vision Norfolk, which it's now known as. And yeah, that was quite cool. That was running workshops for visually impaired participants. So we did a life drawing class, but the model was a guide dog. And a lady called Kate Elgood, who's a fantastic illustrator, led this workshop. And I can't remember how she did it, but everybody produced a drawing, and they were all actually very, very good. So I think it was all about, ironically, looking and drawing, which you think if you can't see very well is impossible, but of course it's kind of not. You just look in a different way. So some people would do things like take pictures of the dog and then use their iPad so that they can zoom in and look at it a bit closer. They were actually very, very good. And originally I started making stencils as an alternative to screen printing, because the layering system, the layering process is similar with screen printing and with stencils, but making stencils is something I could do at home from my own bedroom. So when I'm working normally with collage, it's quite static and you stick it down and it's quite final, but this is quite nice because they move, and when I take them outdoors to spray paint them, quite often by the time I get outside, they don't look like the way they look on my desk, so they're quite fun. I mean, I think this is mind-blowing. And I just folded it up one day. And all of a sudden they went from kissing to doing something a lot more naughty. And I thought this was genius. I thought this was Turner Prize winning work.